Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Nonprofit Education Series sponsored by Tango. Great to see you all. I hope 2021 is off to a good and healthy start for everyone. We have I think, a really interesting webinar today. We're going to be providing everyone with a glimpse, sort of an insider's view of what's going on at the legislature for 2021. So never a dull moment here in Hartford, as I'm sure you'll learn. We are pleased to have Alan Deckman. He's the president of TCORS Capitol Group. Alan and his firm are Tango partners. They've been on board on the platform for a couple of years. And Alan and his team help us at Tango kind of stay abreast as to what's going on in the legislature as it relates to nonprofits. And that's an ever-evolving situation, as we all know. And Alan is going to cast his expertise towards us and really give us some insiders' vantage point as to what we should be looking at as we go through this year's legislative session. For those of you that don't know TCOR, maybe the next slide, please. Know TCOR. They are a full-service government relations and association management firm providing expertise in the areas of lobbying and management. Alan has spent his career pretty much up at the state legislature working with companies, nonprofits on a variety of topics, and does just an awesome job. So we are thrilled to have Alan and his team as a partner at Tango. They've been great for us to just keep tabs on what's going on, and just a great advocate of the nonprofit sector at large as well. Alan truly is committed to serving the sector, not only through his personal life, but through his profession as well. And as such, he's a partner of Tango. Before we get started, I do want to spend just a minute giving everyone a quick update as to what's happening at Tango. Next slide, please. So many of you have seen this slide before. Tango is founded on the principles that there's a better way to do business, that there's a partnership that we've created between the for-profit world and the nonprofit world, where capitalism should not really compete with community support. They should align. And when you do so, some really good things can happen. All of our partners believe in the philosophy of doing well by doing good, that if you align your business interests with serving the sort of greater good, more business will come your way. And that's what we're seeing through our impact with Tango. It's simply a philosophy of doing business. Next slide, please. Quick update. We have 1,400 nonprofits, over 1,400 nonprofits now that have joined Tango, representing about 160,000 people that work in the sector. This gives us enormous impact as we work on things like preferred services with our partner group, more educational opportunities. We have significant expansion plans underway for 2021 that you're going to hear a lot more of. In fact, we're going to be rolling out kind of an ongoing update series just of what's going on with Tango and how you as a nonprofit can take advantage of all we offer. But none of this would be possible without the generosity and the philosophical commitment of our partner group, and you can see them all listed here. And I want to thank all of them for their financial support. They provide financial resources to Tango, so we don't have to charge nonprofits to be part of our organization. So hats off to you guys. Your heart's in the right place. And I just want to finish, one more slide, please, by reminding everybody that we have a foundation. It's a separate 501c3 foundation that is highly committed to continuing the educational opportunities for people that work in the nonprofit sector. We call it our Rising Star Scholarship Award. We are still accumulating some finalists. And I just wanted to remind you that there is still time. If you have somebody that works within your organization that you think is doing an awesome job and super committed to the nonprofit sector that could use some additional support training-wise, please nominate them. If you go to our website, you'll see this tab, the Tango Foundation. There's a nomination form. we will be giving some money out sometime towards the end of the first quarter to support the continued education of folks that work in the nonprofit sector. So, at the end of the day, if we can help train that next generation of leadership when they return to your organization and unleash their knowledge, they'll be that much more impactful in helping you achieve your mission. So we're very proud of this. We've had some wonderful contributions from companies that we work with and people that are close to Tango. So I want to thank all of those that contributed money to making this possible as well. So, but we're here to learn about what's going on at the state capitol. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Alan to get into the meat of today's discussion and enlighten us all as to what to expect as we go through this very, very interesting process. So Alan, if you could take it away. And again, thank everyone for being with us today. It's great to see you all, and stay healthy.
Well, thank you very much, Roland, and also Rob for putting this education series together. I know TCORS Capitol Group is excited and loves to be a part of the Tango group and supporting nonprofits throughout the state of Connecticut. Next slide, please. As Roland had already kind of suggested, or at least discussed, TCORS Capitol Group, we're a full-service government relations and association management company. I've been lobbying for about 25 years at the state legislature, and I've really seen a lot of things happen during that time period. Of course, the one thing we have not seen or dealt with is a pandemic. And with COVID, and what we're looking at now, changing of the rules and really trying to figure out how government is going to work in this session. And we've already started to see some aspects of it. There's a whole set of new rules that came out last week, and we're beginning to slowly but surely start to go through the process. The question is really, how is this legislative session going to run this time of COVID? And the Speaker of the House, Matt Ritter, really came up with a two-pronged approach. The first half is really going to be similar to what it's been since March, which is really a lot of Zoom hearings and social distancing. So the committees themselves have already started having organizational meetings, and it's all via Zoom. A lot of this information you can link to right off the state's General Assembly website, and it'll bring you into the various committee meetings. And so that's already started, and it's been smooth, relatively smooth so far. The thought process is that if enough folks are vaccinated by early to mid-spring, that the second half of the session would be somewhat similar to what we're used to, and that really happens in April, May, and potentially in June. And as we move forward, we'll see if that's going to happen or not, but at least that's the thought process right now. Next slide, please. Will the same number of bills be taken up in a typical year? And this is a really good question. Normally, this is a long session. This is the first year of a 2-year budget process. And then during this particular time period, individual legislators can propose bills. They can propose as many bills as they like. And there's a kind of a 3-tier process in how the session works. I can get into that a little bit further. But the one thing that is going to start to occur is a lot of these agendas that you have within the committees. There have been times you can find 40, 50, 60 bills on one agenda, and that simply isn't going to work in the virtual world. So we're going to see some kind of a resistance, or at least a reduction or limitation on the number of bills that will be heard or held for public hearings, because there will be limited bandwidth on how many bills the legislature is going to be able to work on. And also if they're big comprehensive bills, it's going to be a challenge and a struggle early on to be able to do the work and do it well. The legislature did prove back in July and August when they had a special session, when they came back and dealt with a couple of bills. They used the committee meeting process fairly well, and they also used the public hearing process that seemed to work well. So in the past, I don't know if many of you have dealt or provided testimony at the legislature. You'd show up, you'd sit around for 7-8 hours, and then you get called to testify for 3 minutes. Sometimes legislators are there, sometimes they're not, and then you leave. The difference this year is you'll be able to provide your written testimony like you did last year. but also you'll be able to provide your testimony through Zoom. So you'll be able to do it from your office, from home. That part of the process might work a little bit better than the conventional public hearing process that I'm used to, and others who have participated in the legislative process. Next slide, please. So after the most recent election in November, a lot of things really didn't change too much in Connecticut. The Democrats picked up 9 additional seats. And so you can see their margin of 97 to 54 is pretty significant in the House. And I'll talk a little bit more about Governor Lamont and kind of where he is today than where he was 2 years ago. Also in the Senate, you'll see it's pretty much a veto-proof majority. The Democrats picked up a couple additional seats, and so there's a 24 to 12 margin. And the wild card, and someone who has always been somewhat of a conservative or a moderate on budget items, Senator Joan Hartley of Waterbury, has always, not always, but has sided with the Republicans on different budgetary and financial issues over the years. And she could be someone who could disrupt an override situation if that were to happen. And what's interesting too is we have a new Speaker of the House, Matt Ritter. We have a new House Majority Leader, Jason Rojas. We also have a new House Minority Leader, Vin Candelora. These folks are seasoned legislators, but they have now been placed into new leadership roles. Also in the Senate, Senator Looney and Senator Duff will continue to take the reins for the Senate Democrats. And then Senator Kelly is going to be the new Senate Minority Leader for the Republicans. And what's interesting is if you look at the federal level, obviously putting aside the presidential election, in the Senate, the Democrats gained 3 seats. And so there's a tie in the US Senate with a 50-50 margin, which the vice president would have to break any particular ties in the future. But also in the House, what was interesting, the Republicans picked up 11 seats. And so that margin, the Democrats have 222 seats, the Republicans have 212. And you need 218 as a majority in the House of Representatives. And so what you'll see is it's going to be very difficult for any controversial pieces of legislation to pass at the federal level. The numbers are so tight. And as you know, in Congress, there's elections every 2 years. You have a lot of Democrats who also are in red states or are moderate or more conservative Democrats than from others in their caucus. And so it'll be interesting to see how the new president will be able to work with the US Senate and also with Congress and to really try to find compromise, because they're going to need compromise. Those numbers are so close that it doesn't take many folks to really disrupt, what's happening in Congress in Washington. Next slide, please. And so what you see is pretty much a breakout of the map across the state of Connecticut. Obviously, the Republicans being red and the Democrats being blue. And you can see where the strongholds are throughout the state after this last recent election. Obviously, the map itself is pretty clear on where the strengths and weaknesses are of each of the parties. But we just kind of send this out there for folks to kind of take a look at, and it's not very surprising, I guess, but the visuals are always helpful to see where the party support lies throughout the state. Next slide, please. So there's a few things that I want to kind of talk about as it relates to the legislative process and really how it works. And this graphic here is very confusing to some, but it is an interesting process and how a bill becomes a law. And really how things work. And when I was talking about earlier, there's kind of a 3-pronged process here in Connecticut and how a bill is raised. You have a proposed bill, a raised bill, you have committee bills, and then you have a committee process as well that really looks at all these bills, schedules the public hearings, and then themselves have deadlines on when they need to report those bills out of their committees. And if you go to the next slide real quickly, you'll see this is kind of a lobbyist document that I always kind of keep in my back pocket or try to memorize. Each of the committees are listed on the left side of the document. And if you look at proposed bill deadline, which is January 22nd, you've got your committee bill deadlines, your raised bill deadlines, subject matter public hearings. This is when the hearings themselves need to be held by the committee. And also, one of the most important deadlines is the JF deadline, and that's number 8. It's the joint favorable deadline. And what you'll see from each of the committees that you have interest in, say you look at the Education Committee or the Human Services Committee. Let's check Human Services Committee. April 1st, 2021 is their deadline, which means they need to act on all the bills they're interested in moving out of committee by that date. The bills that they do not act on by that time period fail or die, essentially die. And so there's a structure in place where they start having their meetings, they start looking at their bills, they decide which bills should be promoted throughout the tier of the bills, which bills then should be reserved for public hearing. And this is going to be an interesting year. Like I said, normally there could be 20 or 30 or 40 bills on a public hearing agenda. They're going to have a hard time doing that through a Zoom process. And so that still remains to be seen, what that's going to look like. But as you see, appropriations, which is the state budget, and you're also looking at finance, which handles all the taxes and the tax policy, they're at the end of April, April 22nd, and April 23rd. The one thing that is interesting with this deadlines is if you compare them from 2 years ago, they're about 10 days, the budget committees are about 10 days earlier than they have been in the past. And that's interesting because there's been a lot of talk about trying to end the session prior to Memorial Day, even though the session is scheduled to go to the first full Wednesday in June. So we'll see if they can hold up to that, but they definitely have moved up the important kind of budgetary finance deadlines, which typically is what really holds up what happens, during the session. A couple of things that I think is important to kind of look at is, one of the questions that we can dive into further is, is COVID really going to dominate this session? And I guess it remains to be seen, because one of the things that Mark Paziokis from the Connecticut Mirror raised a good point and the other day when he had said, COVID's kind of been a stress test for Connecticut. It kind of shows what works and what doesn't work. So it's going to be interesting to see if that continues to kind of follow through the process at the legislature. It's a 5-month session, but there will be a lot of limitations that we're not used to, and some of which we haven't seen yet. But I'm sure there'll be some that do pop up. The next slide, please. So Governor Lamont, very interesting. When Governor Lamont was elected, his first session in Connecticut, he took on, or his priorities or goals was the transportation and implementing tolls. And things failed miserably that first legislative session. The governor was bucked by his own party. The Republicans were very strongly against a lot of those initiatives as it related to tolls. And with that, the governor had become one of the least popular governors in the country at the end of 2019. And it was a real interesting process, even though the Democrats held the majority in the House and the Senate. The governor had a hard time coming together on some of the big policy issues that were out there that year. And then, as we know, 2020 came in, and with COVID and the issues and the suspension, essentially, of the General Assembly in March, the governor really became very effective in using his executive orders to govern the state of Connecticut during the emergency. His approval ratings were very, very high on his handling of COVID-19. The governor really kind of switched, and his executive skills and his daily work habits really shone through, as he had the daily briefings that he still has for the most part as it relates to COVID and its impact on the state. His office had directed numerous executive orders on how to govern, some more popular than others, but all well intended to keep people safe and also try to drive a balance of safety and also trying to keep businesses and commerce open in the state of Connecticut. So what's interesting come 2021 is those executive powers are due to expire on February 9th. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with the legislature's response. It'll be interesting to see what the governor's thought process is as well. But also, this is a session where the governor and the legislature have to work together, not only to deal with the issues to the pandemic, but also budget deficits. And this is going to be a test year for the governor because it's an important year to get some very important pieces of legislation passed. He's also thinking about re-election, and re-election is only less than about 2 years away. And so a lot of these things are going to start to play in to this session as being a very, very important session. We just heard not long ago that his budget address right now is tentatively scheduled for Wednesday, February 10th. And that's an important date because essentially in a long session, we start in early January, the committees open up, they kind of have their organizational meetings. There's individual bills that are floating around every day that are proposed. But once the governor, I think, and doing this for all the years I have, once the governor gives his budget address and says, this is the budget I want to propose, this is the budget I want to pass, and along with that are a variety of other initiatives that he's going to address via legislation as well. And once he does that, I always think that's kind of the official start to the legislative session, because that happens and then hearings will start on his proposed budget bills. The Appropriations Committee or the legislature then responds to what he proposes. And so that's when you'll start to see different responses, different proposals. Caucuses will start putting out their own budget alternatives, their budget recommendations, some of which will be similar to the governor's, some of which will challenge the governor's. So I think it'll be interesting. And there's a lot of issues out there that you're already, hearing about. Transportation obviously is one of the issues that will be discussed once again. And the governor is going to be putting together some various revenue ideas to help support and continue to fund the transportation throughout the state of Connecticut. Next slide, please. So here's just a preview of some of the issues that will be coming up. And obviously there's going to be many, many more that will come up throughout the legislative session. And the first one I had already alluded to is the executive powers expiring on February 9th, and really seeing what the response is going to be from the legislature and then also from the governor as it relates to that. Telehealth, which has been something that's been very popular and has been very good for patients and also for clinicians. That was sunset, expires on March 15th. So normally the legislature doesn't normally come into session that early during a session period as a House and Senate body, but they may be forced to come in prior to that date to either continue to extend that date out so that can continue to happen, or make some other changes. So that's going to be an interesting process to see. Budget and taxes, and I'll get into the budget issues in a little bit, but there are many budget issues that are out there, as well as taxes. There's a progressive side of the Democrats who want to raise taxes on millionaires. They want to do a variety of different tax proposals. Governor Lamont has always been resistant to some of those proposals, and still may be up to this point, but we'll see how that works out. Education, as you know, I'm sorry if you can go back to that slide. To the you could go forward to the 2021. There you go. Education, obviously the Commissioner of Education in Connecticut is now going to be also becoming the Commissioner Secretary of Education of the United States. So that's going to leave an opening there. Recreation marijuana is going to be one of the issues that will probably come up as a way to provide funding for as a revenue source, as well as sports betting. We talked about transportation and some of the challenges they're going to have with that particular issue. And then you have vaccinations. Vaccinations was a very challenging issue last session. COVID could make that even more of a challenging issue for this particular session, given the kind of the distribution and the plan that's going on right now. Public option is going to be something for healthcare that is really going to start to be debated this particular session, as well as criminal justice. And there's a variety of other issues that I haven't put on here. I just saw a chat come up on climate change. Will probably also be addressed, or at least discussed this particular session. And so what you see is these are a lot of big issues here, and they're meaty issues. Some are very controversial, like recreational marijuana. This is probably the third or fourth year this has come up. Sports betting's been up a lot. Transportation's been up a lot. Vaccinations has been out there. Budget and taxes is always controversial and tough issue in the state of Connecticut. So you have a lot of big issues. And the question is will the legislature have the bandwidth to really be able to attack and address, all these issues, during this kind of COVID time period? And so we'll have to wait and see and how some of this stuff works.
Alan, we just had another question pop up.
Sure.
Can you see it, or?
Yeah, let me see here. That could yes, I saw that about the charitable property tax exemption. Yeah, there's a good possibility that issue would come up once again. And normally that would come up in the finance committee. And that's a strong possibility that will definitely kind of resurrect itself. I think you're going to see a variety of tax issues surface in this session. And we do have a new House chair of the Finance Committee, Representative Sean Scanlon. And that is a very thorny issue. And I think that that will definitely probably resurrect and come up again as well. So thanks for the question. It's a very good question. The next slide, please. So as you can see from here, the current year's budget deficit, which ends June 30th, there's already a deficit of about $854 million. On top of that, or at the moment, the state has about a $3 billion rainy day fund, which is something that is obviously great to have during these really tough fiscal times. Probably one of the better rainy day funds across the country. But with that, comes a lot of different challenges. And from, you can see this pie graph, you can see where the bulk of the money is spent on state spending. It's about $20 billion. And if you go and you can look at the various dollars and where it's spent, it's pretty significant. I mean, if you look at the pension line, $5 billion a year of the state's spending goes to pensions. And then another $5 billion goes to healthcare. So of the $20 billion between pensions and healthcare is state spending, and it's continuously. It doesn't really change that specifically as as we're looking at it over the years. But it's an interesting kind of graph to see. All right, this is where the state spending goes on an annual basis right here. Next slide, please. So what we're looking at here in OFA, Office of Fiscal Analysis, is really kind of the nonpartisan budget arm. They are the legislature's kind of go-to on issues as it relates to finances for the state of Connecticut. They're not a political party. These are just hardcore financial analysts who just look at the numbers, make their predictions, and they're pretty accurate for the most part. Starting in July, they're looking at a deficit of about $2.1 billion for that fiscal year. And then the following fiscal year, you're looking at about $2.2 billion as well. So although we do have a surplus of about $3 billion, that can disappear rather quickly once you're paying off the current year deficit, and if you're continuously paying off the future year deficit without making some policy changes and looking to do more things with it to raise more revenue. And the governor himself, he's come under a lot of, he's been very resistant to appeals from nonprofit groups like ours and to others, agencies and groups throughout the state looking to use that rainy day fund to provide financial support, to them. And so a lot of that money, he's sitting back and he's saying, look, this money is meant for the rainy day. I don't feel comfortable using this right now because we need this moving forward. And so there's going to be a push to raise taxes on high earners. There's going to be a push to do recreational, marijuana and sports to create some more revenue as they move forward. The governor himself, back in early, I think it was in September, had already requested a 10% cut from spending among state agencies across the board in the state of Connecticut as well. So he's trying to reduce some of the spending. He's trying not to raise taxes, but he also sees in the future years, the deficits are still there. Now the difference, the couple things that we have going for us is Connecticut really benefits from a strong stock market, and the stock market has been really strong, as you can tell, for quite some time now. And so those revenues will come in pretty quickly into the state's coffers. And also, all the federal dollars we've received so far from the pandemic. And there's also a belief that when President-elect Biden is officially the President of the United States after his inauguration, that there's going to be more federal aid coming to the states to support the local governments and the local towns, and also money to people across the state, whether it's another $2,000 stimulus check or it comes in some other fashion. They are expecting a pretty significant amount of support coming down the pike. And so that will be interesting. And then, this all coupled with the vaccines coming online, people getting vaccinated. The state of Connecticut has actually done a really good job on moving forward with their vaccination plan. They've got the vaccine allocation subcommittee that has really broken out a plan and a strategy to vaccinate the most vulnerable first, and really are working through this process, and actually had a meeting yesterday where they wanted to expand the folks who would be part of 1B, and they've done a really good job, and actually have been talked about nationally on really having a pretty good distribution system at this time. So if you move this stuff fast forward 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, the economy gets moving faster in the state, people are getting vaccinated, we may have a better financial picture than we do at the moment. And again, the rainy day fund could not have been a better time to have that kind of money in the bank to kind of weather these types of storms that we're dealing with.
Alan, we have a couple more questions.
Sure.
Can you be more specific about the $5 billion for pensions and for healthcare, and what are the current expenditures paying for?
Yeah, so those dollars are for state employees. I mean, for the most part, a lot of that money is for retirement costs for state employees, for medical and for pension. And it's a significant sum of money that is paid out, that the state has an obligation from various agreements to continue to make those payments, and that will probably increase even more as the folks who have retired become older and require more of those services, but also with folks looking to leave state government in another year or so. Those things are getting more and more expensive and becoming a larger part of the budget, and it's causing a lot of strain to continue to try to fund those on an annual biannual basis and stuff. So that's something that is going to continue to be a struggle for the state moving forward.
Great. And do you anticipate the charitable property tax exemption will be an issue to be discussed? There have been some recent legal developments, including a Supreme Court case that just went through oral argument.
I do think, it's one of those things. Does the legislature propose bills or discuss issues that are, in front of the Supreme Court or in front of other, courts across the land, and sometimes they do. And I would not be surprised if that issue did come up and received a hearing and there were more discussions about it. It was a pretty interesting discussion when it came up initially. So I do think that that issue will come up again in the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee at some point. And again, if you looked at the timelines, the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee, their deadline is a lot further into April. And so they start up their business a lot later than many of the other committees. And they take their time and really start gathering their information once the governor gives his budget address itself.
And a follow-up question, 50% of budget is for state employees. How does that compare with other states?
That's a very good question. I am not very certain on the comparison to other states. I don't know that off the top of my head. I'm sure there's some analysis out there that people look at to be able to make that analysis. But I don't have that, unfortunately, that information in front of me. But we do have some pretty, they have revised the state employee benefits plans over the years. But if you're in a tier 1 or one of the earlier plans, it's a pretty incredible deal that obviously is quite expensive to the state, moving forward.
Great.
Great. And then the next slide. So the out years is something what I talked about as it relates to the deficits that are still out there. And the pandemic itself really caused, obviously, a lot of issues for the state budget. We talk about the debt service, right? Required contributions to pensions, retiree health care. There's going to be increased payments owed to the hospitals, and there's a lot of other fixed costs that drive the deficit forecast that we deal with on a year in and year out basis. Stock market's been on fire, and that has created a lot of increase in revenue. The federal aid to those who are unemployed in the state has been helpful. Some would say it's not enough. Some would say it's too much. There's a lot of debate on that, but there should be more federal aid coming down the pike to the state on top of that. So, that being said, I think it's going to be a challenge for the legislative session. I think if your organization is interested in really staying on top of what's happening at the legislature, monitoring the bills, the regulations that are coming out of the various state agencies, these are the activities and things that my firm does and has done for many, many years. If your organization's interested in changing statute, getting additional funding, looking to receive bond funding to do important capital projects, or changing state statute or changing regulations that are impacting you in a negative way. And these are the things that we have done for over 2.5 decades, working with nonprofits and helping them in this process. One of the things I always talk about as it relates to nonprofits is that you folks are an economic engine in all of your communities and in the state. And I think for too many years, that part, or the importance of that part of being a nonprofit, has been something that has always kind of been a secondary or tertiary kind of discussion. The number of folks that are employed by the nonprofits, the services that are offered, the impact of the nonprofits have in their local communities in the state is really significant. And I do think it's something that has to be continued. That narrative needs to be built, and it has to be a consistent message that's driven across the state to all legislators and to the governor as well. So I do think, at this point, these are the things. The session's starting. It's going to be going for some time. But if you need assistance or you need help or you're interested in learning more about how the process works, we're more than happy to talk to anybody to help them understand it. Because essentially, the legislature and the Capitol and the legislative office building, they're there to work on your behalf. And I think a lot of people forget, they're elected officials. We elect them, and they're there to help you and supposed to help you. So no one should ever feel weird about reaching out to a legislator or representative or a senator. I mean, they're there for a reason, and that's to be, public servants and to help everybody. So, with that, I think if you have any questions or anything, I'd be more than happy to answer any.
Oh, hold on one second. Let's see. Yeah, from Lorraine at Easter Seals. What is the status of the nonprofit grant program in terms of budget?
Well, I think that's being looked at currently, and that may be part of the governor's proposal when he comes on February 10th to provide analysis to the state of Connecticut. He's going to provide his budget presentation, and normally during that process, he will talk about whether he wants to put $50 million in that particular program or $100 million into that program, or if he wants to dedicate other revenue sources or other line items to support some of these programs. So I think you probably will hear something more when he provides his budget address on that day. So, and that's been a pretty good fund to help folks in the last couple of years.
Okay, great. Any more questions? Okay.
Hey, Alan, it's Roland. Last year, within the circles of Tango, we spoke a fair amount about the impending retirees out of the state and whether or not those jobs could be replaced in the private nonprofit sector versus additional sort of state jobs. Any updates on what's going on that front?
There really hasn't been much. I do think, I believe the governor had reached out and hired a firm out of Boston to kind of look at some of these ideas. I know there's been some discussion about it, but kind of given what's happened in the state and there's kind of been there was a lot of talk about it early on, and then things kind of subsided and stuff. But I do think that's an area where the discussions need to speed up, and there needs to be a lot more ideas and suggestions and thoughts put out there, because the numbers of potential retirements is really significant. And the private providers in the state could really provide and step up and provide some great services to help the state during that time period, and to really become more of a permanent supplier of services at a really incredible cost, but also with incredible outcomes. And so I think, that's one of those areas that hopefully will get a lot more attention this session.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think the delivery of services from the private nonprofit sector is significantly less money with better outcomes. So hopefully that'll be something that emerges as a key topic. I know it's up against union initiatives the other way, but definitely a topic that should be addressed.
Oh, absolutely. No, and it's a real issue. And the governor has, even himself said so publicly that, it's a really big issue, and something that's going to need a lot of attention and discussion about.
We have another question from Alana. Can you explain what you meant by Lamont's executive powers ending?
So when the pandemic hit and the legislature essentially closed down early back in March, the committee came together because the government needed to continue to operate during that pandemic. And there were a lot of things that needed to happen. There were some budgetary issues. There was a lot of issues with regulations. There was issues with what businesses could be open, not open. The question was, could restaurants have 50% capacity? Could they have 20% capacity? Telehealth. All right, we're going to allow telehealth now. These were all issues that the governor himself and his team were making. He received some legislative input, but each day, for many, I think he ended up doing, I don't know what the total number of executive orders were, but I remember in their 70s, maybe even got into the 80s, Each day there was laying out new guidance, right? Education for schools. How are schools going to be financed or funded? You know, what qualifies for an education service, and what businesses were going to stay open, which businesses were going to close, who's considered an essential employee versus non-essential employee. And so the governor himself and his team really managed government through this process. And so there were updates on a daily and weekly basis of really guidance on what the state should be doing during this time period. And the legislature themselves, again, were in conversation with the governor, but ultimately it was up to him to really lay out and manage how the state was operating during the pandemic. And those orders or those powers essentially had a sunset date, which is coming near close. So it'll be interesting to see if there's an extension or if the legislature feels as though there doesn't need to be one. So that's what that is meant by that.
Great. I think that's all the questions that we have for now. But obviously, as members of Tango, you can reach out to our partners at any time. All their information, their contact information is on our partner page on our website. So, feel free to, reach out to them, continue to use their services. And Rollin, you want to chime in?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rob. Alan, nice job. Thank you very much. Please keep us posted with things as they develop, especially as they relate to affecting the nonprofit sector. And we can channel that out through our connections too, through our Tango Trends newsletter and maybe holding additional webinars too. So really appreciate you being with us today. There's a lot going on at Tango right now. There's a ton. And we really look forward to bringing more and more resources to you guys in 2021, both from Tango and the Schuster Group. We have a lot going on as well. It's an exciting, very, very exciting time. Rob, you want to just quickly tick through some of the events we have upcoming so people can maybe put it on their radar screen if they're interested?
Yeah. Absolutely. Our next webinar is next week on January 20th. It's actually part 2 of the Connecticut Paid Family and Medical Leave Act series. So we have that coming up, and then on January 28th, we have how to increase your fundraising efforts, which I'm sure everyone would love to do. So those are the next 2 that are in the queue. Keep on the lookout on our website for more to come. We have probably about 5 or 6 coming up in February, which will be posted probably within the next week and a half. As you all know, our events are free to our members. So, take advantage of, the education, and obviously take advantage of the services that our partners provide. So
I don't want to leave without mentioning the work that's been put forth on our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative. That's been quite an undertaking, led by Jack Horick and Fred Knorr, that work here at Tango. And there's a multitude of resources in that space. That is a hotbed of activity. Some of these issues are not easy to deal with within an organization or a board. But we have spent the entire summer, and quite frankly longer than that, approximately about a year, putting some resources together. So there's going to be a flyer coming out on some of that. There's a little teaser video that will give you guys a little insight as to what we can help you with on that front if you're aligned to learn more on that front. So we continue to put more and more out there. If you guys have suggestions, what we as Tango can do, which again is corralling the business community in support of the nonprofit sector and working collaboratively to really change things for the positive. So we welcome your ideas, your input, and without anything else, it's time to cast off and get back to work. So thank you all for being here. Stay healthy, and cheers to a really fantastic 2021. And Alan, thanks again. Really appreciate your support here.
Thank you.
Take care.